So, good morning to everybody. Very warm welcome from ETSC. My name is Ellen Townsend, and I'll be chairing this webinar this morning. A few housekeeping rules before we start properly. The event is going to be recorded, and I would really very much encourage you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions. The idea is to have the presentations first, and then we'll take questions linked either to the presentations or any other questions that you might have on delivering safer cycling and walking in European cities during the panel discussion. So that means you have to stay all the way to the end if you want to be there for the juicy bit, the exciting bit where we're discussing what's being presented. So why are we here today? Cycling and walking is in the news like never before. Entire countries, cities, individuals are having to totally rethink their mobility habits because of the COVID pandemic, of course, but we also have the issue of the climate emergency, the European Green New Deal, also challenging us to rethink how we move. Good news is that we've seen that change is possible. Specifically in Brussels, we've seen cycling use up over 80%, and in London it's beyond 100%. So an increase in cycling in September compared with the year before. At the same time, we've seen pop-up bike lanes being set up sometimes overnight across the world. This is all great news, but we know that cyclists and pedestrians are amongst the most vulnerable road users. And we'll hear a little bit more about that when Jenny Carson, my colleague from ETSC, presents our latest report later on this morning. Cyclists and pedestrians account for 1/3 of all Europe's road deaths. And as more people choose these modes, we need to keep them safe. Before we start the event properly, we want to launch a poll, so you get to express how you feel in terms of walking and cycling in your city, in your town, in your area. We wanted to ask you also about how you felt either as a woman or as a man. There was a survey done recently in Brussels looking at why fewer women cycle than men. So in Brussels, the split is 1/3 women and 2/3 men. And one of the reasons given by women as to why they are not cycling is that there are concerns on road safety. So that's why we're going to ask you also to reply according to whether you are a woman or a man. So you've got two questions here, one on safe walking and one on cycling. So whilst we talk through, we wait for those results, give you time to respond, I'll just take you through the program for this morning. So we're going to start with my colleague Jenny Carson from ETSC, who's going to present the findings of our latest results. You can see the link there in the chat box on how safe is walking and cycling in the EU. Next, we have Matthew Baldwin, who's the Deputy Director General at the European Commission, as well as Coordinator for Road Safety and Urban Mobility. He's going to give us an overview of what the Commission is doing or could do to support safe, active and sustainable mobility. From the European perspective, we're going to go to two very different cities, very interesting cities, presentations from Oslo and from Brussels. So two people who are going to share their experiences of how they're managing walking and cycling. From Brussels, we have Stefan van den Hende, who's working in the cabinet of the Brussels Minister for Mobility, Elke van den Brandt. Under Minister van den Brandt's leadership, Brussels has taken some very quite dramatic new initiatives on cycling, as well as around plans to introduce 30K. Stefan's going to tell us a bit more about that and how safety is being ensured. And then we're going to, sorry, it's the other way around. Oslo will go first. So we're also delighted to have Ida Kongsrud. She's the head of traffic safety at the municipality of Oslo. So Oslo has gained a global reputation for its pedestrian and cyclist safety, having not had any pedestrian or cyclist deaths on its roads in 2019. So that's 0 deaths, pedestrian and cyclist deaths on its roads. And of course, we're really, really interested to hear how they achieve that and what the secrets to that success can be, how we can learn from that. Now, do we have the results of the poll? If yes, it would be great if we could bring those up. Yeah, okay. So quite interesting there. We've got a bit of a mix on the safe walking. There's definitely a difference there between the women and the men. And then scrolling down for cycling also. Well, yeah. We'll come back to that issue later on. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Didier Stevens. He's Senior Manager for European and Government Affairs at Toyota Motor Europe. Toyota Motor Europe is one of the partners supporting the PIN project, and we're very, very grateful to them for their support. Didier, welcome. If you can unmute, please. Can you unmute your mic, please? Thanks. We still can't hear you. So bottom left on the Zoom panel. Yeah, now we've got you, Didier, or at least I thought.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Okay. One of the features of working from home. Good morning, everybody. I said my name is Didier, and I'm in charge of European affairs within Toyota Motor Europe. I hope you're all well and safe, especially during these challenging times. Let me start by saying that Toyota is very proud regarding its relations with ETSC, which started already in 2006. And each time we are participating to events like today, we can each time confirm our commitment to road safety. But we also have concrete results. One is the recent introduction since the beginning of this month of the emergency priority lane in Belgium as a result of our involvement in the Revive project. However, our main contribution as a car manufacturer is still to provide safer vehicles. And I hope you all heard about the Toyota Safety System, which is a package of technologies aiming to reduce traffic accidents as much as possible. I can say that this is standard to almost all Toyota and Lexus vehicles. And we can create, by doing so, a safer environment for everyone, also including more vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians and cyclists. For example, and considering today's topics, the pre-collision system with pedestrian detection. This technology uses a camera and a radar to detect possible collisions with pedestrians. And when the possibility of a collision is detected, the driver is alerted by audio and visual warnings, and braking assist is activated. If the driver fails to brake in time, the brakes automatically engage to prevent or mitigate a collision. This is one example of a concrete Toyota contribution to safer European cities. Many thanks for your attention, and I wish us all a very fruitful discussion during today's online event. Thank you very much.
Thank you too very much, Didier, for your warm words of welcome and support to ETSC. We'll certainly be coming back to the issue of vehicle safety and the recent changes as well later on this morning in the program. So our first presentation of the day, I'd like to welcome Jenny Carson. She's the project officer here at the ETSC working on the PIN. So how safe is walking and cycling in Europe, Jenny? You also need to unmute.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ellen. Hopefully you can all see my screen. So I'm Jenny Carson. I'm a project officer here at ETSC, and I'm going to give you a run through of a report we published early in the year looking at the safety of cycling and walking in Europe. So first of all, just a little bit about the PIN program. PIN stands for the Road Safety Performance Index program. It involves 32 countries, including all the EU member states. And we're very lucky to have an expert in each of those countries that helps us with our work. We produce an annual report every June, which looks at the performance, the road safety performance of each of the participating countries. And we also, throughout the year, publish more detailed reports into specific road safety issues, such as walking and cycling. And we've had 39 of those to date. We also organise a number of events, such as this webinar, where we focus into a specific topic. But the report that we're looking at today is the flash report number 38 into cycling and walking, and it was published at the beginning of this year. And what does that report tell us? It tells us that 5,180 pedestrians and 2,160 cyclists were killed in the EU in 2018. If we look at the proportion of those deaths as a total of total road deaths, then pedestrians account for 21% and cyclists 8%. If we look at 2010, those figures were 20% and 7% respectively. Pedestrians and cyclists together therefore account for nearly 30% of all road deaths. It is important to say, when I'm talking about this slide, that we know that there is a high level of underreporting in collisions involving cyclists and pedestrians. And so we believe the actual number of pedestrians and cyclist road deaths would actually be much higher than these figures reported. So just a quick slide here, because we do look at all the countries in the PIN program. And this slide looks at the pedestrians, cyclists, power two-wheelers, vehicle occupant deaths, and the unknown deaths reported by the police as a proportion of all reported road deaths. And they are then ranked, 32 PIN countries are then ranked by the proportion of deaths that were pedestrians and cyclists taken together. And then at the very end, you can see the EU average. If we delve into those figures a bit more deeply, we can find that 47% of the pedestrians killed and 44% of the cyclists killed were actually over 65 and older. So I think that's an important piece of information, particularly for policymakers. I think it's also interesting to see how the situation has evolved since 2010 and what the reductions in road deaths have been. We can see there also how they compare with reductions in car occupants. And there's been some progress in reducing the number of pedestrian deaths, 19%. But for cyclists, things haven't really changed at all. And I do have to say here, of course, that this could, of course, be due to the fact that more people are cycling. And there's also the issue that we don't have the data on the kilometres cycled. And so this makes it difficult to know if that is indeed the case. So what do we know about where these deaths are happening? Well, 70% of pedestrian deaths and 57% of cyclist deaths occur on urban roads. 99% of pedestrian deaths and 83% of cyclist deaths follow a collision with a motor vehicle. Now, given the high levels of urbanisation in the EU, and then that frequent interaction between the vulnerable road users and motorised traffic in our cities and towns, these figures are perhaps not surprising. I should perhaps say one thing about the percentage of pedestrians that followed a collision with a motor vehicle, the 99%, because that figure is quite stark. And it's important to note that when a pedestrian falls on the road, that this is currently not considered as a road death. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about underreporting. Now, in the PIN reports, we also look at serious injuries, and we looked at them in this report, and we found that 30,000 pedestrians were recorded as seriously injured in 2018, and 32,000 cyclists. It should be noted that the definition of a serious injury is recorded here according to the national definition. And we have the data here from 21 EU member states. Now you can see the progress here in terms of reducing the number of reported serious injuries. And again, the cyclists have gone up, but this could of course be to the fact that more people are cycling. So what do we think, how do we think that cycling and walking in Europe could be made safer? In our report, we include a number of recommendations, and I'm going to have a look at some of them here. Obviously, there are a lot more than I'm going to be able to present. So we believe that 30-kilometre zones supported by traffic calming are a key measure to take. We know that pedestrians have a much higher chance of surviving a collision with a car at 30 kilometres or below. So that's an important measure. Also, just the fact of reducing motor vehicle traffic in our towns and cities. We could improve road safety just by doing that. Safe pedestrian crossings, intersections and footways. 28% of cyclists' fatal collisions happen at intersections, and these really need to be clear and highly visible. Separate cycle paths, particularly where vulnerable road users, the cyclists, are mixing with motor traffic at higher speeds. Separate cycle paths are key. And of course, improved enforcement. And enforcement isn't just about the police. Speed can be enforced by infrastructure as well. So that's an important message to take. I think also, if we look at all the different levels of government, the local, the EU, the member states, one message to all levels of government would be, we would urge them to adopt the modal priority based on the vulnerability of the road users. So design your towns and cities according to our most vulnerable people. To the cities, we'd urge you to adopt local road safety strategies based on the safe system approach, road safety targets, and include road safety in your sustainable urban mobility plans. To the member states, we'd encourage you to develop walking and cycling safety strategies with targets and infrastructure measures. we've actually got a bit in our report about to what extent these strategies are being developed in the member states. So that's quite interesting. Member states, when you're looking at public procurement, why not require vehicle safety in your public sector fleets? Enforcement, again, is key. Collect travel data for all road users and road types. I've mentioned in the beginning of my presentation the lack of some data, and it would be great to have it to really be able to measure these things properly. And keep records of single pedestrian falls. To the EU, we would urge you to adopt an EU safe, active mobility strategy, perhaps funds and support priority measures such as 30-kilometre zones. And what about a KPI on roads with safe and credible speed limits? So thank you very much. I must say there's plenty of data there to consider. And of course, I'd like to thank all the PIN panelists that helped to create this report. And if you'd like to download the report, hopefully you can find it at the link, which you can still see. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much, Jenny, for presenting our report. It's a massive report. I really encourage you to have a look at it. And we'll have the chance to get into both the data and those recommendations when we hear from the cities and during the panel discussion, and of course Matthew, who's coming in a minute. Before we hear from Matthew, we're going to run another quick poll. If you could put that up, please. Do you support a default 30-kilometre-per-hour limit for urban areas? Either you think, yes, it's a great idea. Yes, but just around schools and residential areas, or no, keep 50 as the default limit for urban areas. So whilst you're responding to that, just a couple of things on housekeeping. If you want to increase the volume, you need to go to your volume button. It's not to do with us, okay? So your own volume button. Thank you very much for all those questions to Jenny. So Jenny will have a chance to study them. That's the advantage of going first. But yeah, some of the answers, of course, are in the report, but we'll certainly try to come back to those questions during the panel discussion. We've got over 230 people listening in from all over Europe. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to make time for the webinar of ETSC. We're also broadcasting live on YouTube. So I see we've got the results. Okay, well, we've got definitely more than 60% saying yes to the first one, and if you add in the 37%, we're nearly at 100% for keeping 30K. So next up, Matthew, I guess, please do also comment on that. Matthew is Deputy Director General at the European Commission, our coordinator for road safety and urban mobility. So of course, with this topic, it's a very, very strong link there. And Matthew's going to tell us about what the Commission has been doing and is planning to do to secure the safety of walking and cycling in Europe. Thanks very much for joining us today, Matthew. Over to you.
Well, good morning, Ellen. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Ellen and Jenny, perhaps I should apologise that you've only heard British voices so far. How ghastly. But we are going to hear genuine Europeans in a minute, I promise. Great presentation, Jenny. Thanks. And to all friends at the ETSC, wonderful report, but you're going to have to update it, of course, because you produced it in January. And of course, since then, we've had COVID, which changes so much. So there's an incentive to do it again. On the numbers, I won't repeat anything that Jenny said, but I'm struck by the number 70. 70% of us now live in cities. That's going to rise to probably about 80% by 2050. And 70% of the deaths in cities, the number I use, I'm not sure it's quite borne out by what Jenny just said, but 70% of the deaths in cities are to vulnerable road use. And unpacking that, what that means is we've made driving in cars in cities safer over the years. That's great. and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, but we've been less successful in making vulnerable road users safer on the roads in our cities. And Jenny's presentation, I think, was very strong on that point. If I may just briefly bring in some broader international alternatives, not to pat ourselves on the back in the European Union, but to show, I think, where there's some problems may be coming. Just published a very interesting report by two great academics in the US, Ralph Buhler and John Pusher, on a growing gap in pedestrian cycling fatality rates between the US and 4 named European countries. And just quickly from that, the US cycling and pedestrian fatality rate per kilometer ridden, and I know there are questions on the chat about the per kilometer point, is between 4 and 10 times higher than in those 4 European countries. It has fallen in the US, as in the EU, over the last 30 years. But listen to this, in the last decade, 33% increase in cycling deaths per kilometer ridden in the US, and a 50%, 50, increase in pedestrian deaths, raw number, in the US over the last decade. And I mention this because we in Europe, don't we, tend to have a bad habit of following bad habits in the US. So let's not go there, and let's see if we can find a way to make this safer. You mentioned I have 2 hats, Ellen, kindly. I do road safety and I do sustainable mobility. And I love talking about this subject because this is one of the few distinct areas where the two go together. If we can promote active mobility, we can also make it safer. Active mobility goes together with public health. We know that, and there are great grounds if you look at some of the figures produced by the European Cycling Federation, for example. I think 3/4 of the overall benefits from cycling come from the public health effects. It's a huge impact. It's also vital if we consider it in relation to the external costs of road transport, and apologies to those of you who've heard me bang on about this before, but if you look at the external costs of road transport, 40% of that is environmental, so CO2 emissions, air quality, noise. 30% of it relates to road congestion, and 30% of it indeed relates to road safety. So again, if we can promote active mobility, cyclists and walkers are ticking all of those boxes. And therefore, it's no surprise, frankly, that it's not just about the health of the individuals concerned, but it's about the health and the health of the cities themselves. So I pose myself a question: when we promote active mobility in the road safety context, if we keep the number of cars constant, aren't we actually putting more cyclists and pedestrian in harm's way? You saw the numbers from Jenny, 99% of pedestrian deaths are from contact with a road, with a motor vehicle, and 83% of cycling. Well, here's 4 reasons why not. Firstly, again, it's the health. Secondly, and I know there's some mixed evidence on this, but it's certainly, I think, a very strong overall feeling that the more cyclists and walkers there are, the more critical mass, to coin a phrase, is developed, the safer it gets, because everyone gets more used to seeing cyclists and walkers on the roads. And anecdotally, in Brussels, I think that's really very much the case. Car drivers seem much more aware of our presence on the roads. Secondly, you have this beautiful snowball. Thirdly, you see this beautiful snowball effect between how active mobility drives pressure for infrastructure, which in turn drives activity. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from our cities in a moment as to how they have felt that. And finally, again, we know that segregating vulnerable road users makes them safer, and again promotes the activity because people feel safer. There was an interesting poll which I tweeted out from Belgium. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stefan, it's Brussels, but I think it said that 1/3 of cyclists said they would cycle more if they felt safer. And there you go, infrastructure is directly going to be a problem. Quick word on data, and I'm going to get on to the thing I'm meant to be talking about in a moment, I promise. Yes, it's a problem. ETSC have rightly identified this. I've rightly been banging my head about it, saying why we're not getting better data on overall data, frankly, in cities in terms of per kilometer driven for cars, for motorbikes, for bikes, and for cyclists. It's a perennial problem in that we haven't managed yet to find an agreement with member states about how we're going to do that, but we've got to do it, and we know that, and we're coming to that. Second thing on data, for those of you who are thinking about this, please make sure you're gathering data on the right things, and that is in terms of safety, on the number of killed and the number of seriously injured. I had a bit of a run-in with the good folks in Stockholm who proudly showed me how much data they gathered on injuries from different incidents in Stockholm. And when you look at the number of injuries suffered, single vehicle cyclists and individual pedestrians are by far higher. And that comes from old people like me being clumsy on their bicycle or slipping on the ice and going in with a sprained wrist or a hip. These are bad events, but they are not the killed and the seriously injured. That's what we've got to gather data on. That is the whole basis of what we're trying to achieve in road safety in the SAFE system. So please make sure we're gathering data on the same things. I'll be very short on speed. Yes, I do strongly support the 30km/h zone. My office is festooned with evidence of this support. Why? Because we know in road safety terms that if you're struck by a car at 30km/h, your chances of survival are around 90%. If your speed of the car rises to around 60km/h, which I'm sorry to say from ETSC data, we know is the default speed of cars in a 50km zone, your chance of survival fall to just 10%. And when you explain that to city planners, they say, my goodness, why haven't we done this already? It's the knowest of no-brainers, as I like to say. Right, now, what? And the remaining time, I've eaten this up with commenting, in the remaining 5 minutes, quickly on what the EU can do. Without boring the pants off you, a lot of this is governed by a legal concept called competence. And very quickly, on vehicle safety, we are competent. We make the standards at the European level, and we've had a great success. And Toyota, thank you for everything you've done. We've made, again, vehicle safety for those in cars much, much safer. And in the next generation of improvements, hopefully, we will make the safety of people outside cars safer through intelligent speed assistance, through automated emergency braking, through the kinds of pedestrian and cyclist detection capability that Toyota were talking about. From 2022, on all new models, these things will be mandatory. From 2024, in all cars, and we expect to see a major step increase or step decrease in deaths flowing from these improvements in vehicle safety. On infrastructure safety, the EU is, I would describe, increasingly competent. The Road Infrastructure Safety Management Directive has now been extended to include not just motorways, but increasingly national roads. And I know that the ETSC, and I'll come on to that, want us to go further and bring urban roads within that system. There's nothing preventing countries or cities using the principles of road infrastructure safety management for urban areas. It's not yet a requirement at European legislation. We're going in that direction. We're not there yet. And then finally, on speed, this is not an area where the EU is competent. It is member states and cities that set their speed limits. We had a fascinating speed seminar last week about what more the European Union could do on speed, including in the urban area. And I'm looking forward to releasing the papers on that shortly. And I think they'll make for some very interesting reading. But my message to you is, please don't get, and I say it's a message to my colleagues inside the EU as well, let's not get too hung up on this question of competence. We have, for example, through the Urban Mobility Package in 2013, developed a growing and very popular system of sustainable urban mobility planning, which sets out guidelines, including on how we can make active mobility safer. More than 1,000 cities in the European Union and outside the EU have adopted some sustainable urban mobility plans. There's a whole range of things we can do more of, including, as the ETSC recommends, more specificity in terms of key performance indicators on active mobility. Later this year, the European Commission will be bringing out a new sustainable and smart mobility strategy. There will be a big chunk, I hope, beyond my pay grade to say now, there will be a big chunk of work, I think, on urban road safety and on safe urban active mobility. And specifically, we will be revising the urban mobility package next year. So look for ways in which we are going to be developing the concept of sustainable urban mobility. One idea, for example, is that we develop sustainable urban mobility indicators, challenging cities to deliver on 100% carbon neutrality by a certain date, to deliver 0 fatalities on the roads, as Oslo has achieved, as Helsinki has achieved, as Pontevedra in Spain has achieved. And I'll leave to Oslo and Brussels to say more about that. Last thing, and I really will stop, and I'm sorry if I've exceeded my time. Funding. Where's the money? I hear you say. Well, there's help at hand in the Next Gen EU package, and we always have multiple names for things. The Recovery and Resilience Facility has 750 billions of new money coming on the table. In the first instance, it's for member states to set out their plans and how they would like to spend that money, and we're giving them some guidance on how to do that. And yes, sustainable mobility is part of that guidance. But at the end of the day, it'll be for member states to present their plans. So my message to you is get out there and make sure that your member states know that you want to hear sustainable urban mobility figures prominently in that. There's other money available too, of course. The cohesion funds, I hope, will turn increasingly towards road safety and sustainable mobility in the coming years. And they're part of a 1.1 trillion euro budget. So there's a lot of money in them, their hills. And the last point I want to make and link to that is on partnerships. We heard a bit about that from Jenny already. Partnerships in policy areas. I'm so glad that this seminar is tackling walking and cycling. Too often we focus just on cycling or just on walking. You guys are natural allies. You're also allies with the public transport community. Going back to the quandary about an urban mobility system governed just by active mobility in cars, that isn't the safest of cocktails. Public transport is a really safe cocktail. We know public transport's taken a hit in COVID. And one of the things we want to do is to rebuild confidence across Europe in public transport to the level of the same level of risk of going to your local supermarket. And that's the reality. People shouldn't be scared of using public transport. It's a vital part of our urban mobility system. The other part of partnership, of course, is between levels of government, between the European, the national, the regional, and the city level. That, I think, is really down to people like me to try to make sure that we're all speaking from the same hymn sheet, working together, looking for synergies. And finally, partnership with industry and with NGOs. And that's the last thing, and I'll stop there. I'm so pleased to see representatives of the car industry, of all the different sustainable mobility industries as well. And of course, cities and regions. And last but not least, NGOs like ETSC. We couldn't do it without you. I can't recommend strongly enough the ETSC PIN reports. If you haven't looked at them, take a minute, go online. It's such a rich diversity of issues, brilliantly researched and fantastically presented. There's the free publicity over, and I stop there. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much, Matthew, for that excellent overview of what is coming from the European Commission, what the Commission is already doing, and also how we can help. We're definitely noting the need to act on funding, on encouraging the member states to include safe urban mobility in their plans that they're going to present on how to use the new EU budget. And you also touched on one of the recommendations from our report. So ETSC is calling on the Commission to come forward with an active mobility strategy. So that means looking at both cycling and walking together, as you say. So our Q&A box is exploding. Thanks very much for those questions. Please be patient. And as I said at the beginning, try and stay on for the panel discussion, which will be during the last half an hour. So now we come to two cities to see what they've been doing on the ground to keep their cyclists and pedestrians safe. So very happy to have Ida Kongsrud from the municipality of Oslo. Welcome. And Stefan Van den Hende, you're then after her. Welcome to you as well. Over to you, Ida, on the way to Vision Zero. You've already made great strides.
Thank you. I shall try to share my presentation with you. Let's see. Yes, oh, sorry. Got a bit far off there. There we are. Hopefully you can all see what I'm trying to present. Yes. So speaking to you from Oslo, my name is Ida Kongsrud. I'm the unit leader of the road safety section at the Agency for Urban Environment in the city of Oslo. And I'm very grateful to be here to be able to speak to you about our city's way towards Vision Zero. So the fjord and forest areas surround the city of Oslo, and buildings dominate a great part of the city land use, and this leaves a limited area to roads and road users. And the challenge here, as well as in many other European cities, is how we can use the available area to provide for a safe interaction between the different groups of road users. So one of the main goals for the Municipal Agency for Urban Environment is to contribute to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transport. Among other things, this means to increase transportation on foot and bicycle, and this goal needs to be achieved within the limits of the Vision Zero. So is this compatible, these two different aims? Moving towards the Vision Zero and at the same time increasing transportation by foot and bicycle requires that the city of Oslo needs to work actively with road safety measures. If accident reducing measures are not carried out, the transportation by walking and cycling increases as aimed, the number of accidents will potentially rise here as well. So that's why it's a main task for us to provide smart road safety solutions that contribute to good quality of life among our citizens. And today I will talk about the aspect of safety for our most vulnerable ones, the pedestrians and bicycle riders. This graph shows the fatality rates of road users on foot and bicycle over the last 20 years in Oslo. We experience a positive trend in fatal road accidents in general, and we are of course very pleased to see that no pedestrians or bicycle riders lost their lives in our streets last year. This result, of course, is not achieved by one magical measure. We believe that the measures made over a number of years in a cooperative effort towards the Vision Zero on different levels and in different sectors of our society all have contributed to this fantastic result. So despite the positive trend and results in 2019, there is a continued need to keep up the work. So far this year, we have experienced one fatal accident involving a pedestrian at an intersection, and one is of course one too many. In addition, we've had 2 fatal accidents involving motorbikes this year. So, but still, we are inspired by the positive trend, of course. Where we've seen the largest decline of fatalities is among car drivers and passengers. Even though we do see a reduction of fatalities among pedestrians and bicycle riders as well, the decline up to 2019 has been less steep for these groups of road users. In Oslo, the second most frequent type of road accident during the recent years, at least, is a car hitting pedestrian. This happens typically at an intersection when the pedestrian is crossing the road, both at zebra crossings and elsewhere. Pedestrians are also at a relatively high risk when walking along the road. Registered accidents involving cyclists occur most often at intersections, typically being hit by a meeting motorist or by a motorist making a turn in front of the cyclist. Accidents with cyclists also tend to be single accidents, of course, where no other road users are involved. So since we aim to increase the number of travels made on foot and bicycle, we need to take necessary measures to continue this positive trend that we're experiencing towards the Vision Zero. So what has led to this positive trend that we experience? The one factor is a coordinated strategic planning towards the Vision Zero over time. And then speed is a major factor for the outcome of any accident. In Oslo, we are working systematically to reduce speed in different ways, over the last 5 years, we have reduced the speed limits for more than 190 stretches of road. In addition, we have carried out a great number of other speed reducing measures, such as speed humps, redesigning of intersections, and narrowing the car lane. At the same time, the conditions for walking and cycling is being improved by better infrastructure, cycling paths and physical separation of different road user groups. And the motor traffic is also reduced by measures such as prohibiting motor traffic on certain streets, one-way regulation of streets, charging toll fees, and reducing the number of parking lots. I'll explain a little how we work with these accident reducing factors in the city of Oslo. But first, the effort for road safety on a local and regional level, such as in Oslo, is part of a nationally coordinated strategy. For instance, where there is the action plan for road safety, which is a 4-year plan on a national level. So a nationwide effort coordinated by the Norwegian Public Roads Administration, involving public and private organizations, and it is considered to be a major contributor for the downward trends in fatal accidents in Norway as a whole. All measures agreed upon here are based on scientific research and analysis, and each measure is pinpointed to a specific contributor. The work with a new plan is about to begin, and the City of Oslo will be part of the process alongside other cities and regions, the police, private associations and NGOs, and relevant state administrations. On a more local level, we have something called the OTU, which is a road safety coalescence of public units and private organizations in Oslo coordinating shared aims. It is a forum for discussion, sharing knowledge and coordination of measures involving, for instance, the Motorcycle Association, the tramway and metro police, and also regional representation of the Norwegian Public Roads Administration, to name some. The forum aims to achieve the same understanding of road safety challenges in Oslo so that we can all pull towards a common goal within our different areas of work. The Municipal Action Plan for Road Safety, which is currently under development in my own section, will give us an overview of the specific challenges in Oslo, identify new challenges, and point a direction for prioritizing effective measures for the couple of years to come. And there's also a high degree of interest, demands, and questions concerning road safety generally. We receive instructions from the town hall and several suggestions from our 15 district councils, from schools, parents, citizens in general, and the media. And we consider the inputs that we receive, working within the limits of regulations, standards, scientific knowledge about accidents and risks, instructions that we get from the city council, and the financial means available to us, and try to make holistic assessments and prioritize within our limits systematically. We continuously work to make improvements, and two of our major focus areas are the traffic conditions in school areas and the infrastructure for pedestrians and bicycle riders. And I shall go a bit more into depth about those shortly. But first, planning. When it comes to planning, we attempt to involve knowledge about road safety early on in planning processes and building projects. We know from experience that it is safer and more cost-effective to get things right from the beginning than to make changes in the aftermath. So, of course, in any project, there is a wide range of consideration that sometimes come into conflict with each other, especially when the area is limited, like in a city. The road safety section takes part in many different processes and projects to find solutions to maintain both road safety and mobility among the other concerns. So Let's go into some examples of our specific tasks. In 2020, we carry out approximately 120 road safety improvements and smaller projects. On our website, we've published a map with an overview of them so that citizens can find where and what we are working with. The measures are a mix of signs, street markings, redesigned intersections, school area projects, speed humps, elevated zebra crossings, and so on. Based on what we know about accidents in Oslo involving pedestrians and cyclists, it is especially important to redesign intersections, keeping these groups of road users in mind. And this is one example of a redesigned intersection, aiming at giving vulnerable road users more space by widening the pavement, reducing the speed of cars by narrowing the street lane, and shortening the crossing distance for pedestrians. So this particular example is from a street close to a school in downtown Oslo. And there are also other measures at work in the same area, such as rerouting of motor traffic in streets where motor traffic has been prohibited, all working together to get the kids safely to and from school. The areas around schools are prioritized in our work with traffic safety measures. In Oslo, most kids walk or cycle on their way to school, especially in the downtown areas. It's a national aim that 80% of all pupils should walk or cycle on their way to school, and the largest cities are closest to meeting this aim. But even here, it is still a challenge that a lot of parents choose to drive their kids to school, which in itself adds to the risk for the children who gets to school on foot or bike. So if we really want to improve the road safety conditions around schools, we need a change of awareness and get parents to act differently. We are aiming at this in a program called Heart Zone. This program is designed in cooperation between public and private organizations, and Oslo has adopted it. In the coming few years, the City of Oslo is aiming at creating a safer road environment around all our elementary schools. What is particularly interesting about this program is the local involvement of pupils and parents, and it combines working with both awareness and physical road safety measures to reduce motor traffic around schools. The central program group involves the schools at first through contact with the headmaster and the PTA. And when a school agrees to join the project, the task is to identify and describe local traffic challenges that the kids meet on their way to school. We conduct surveys among both parents and pupils, and the kids also physically examine their way to school and report difficulties that they have experienced in traffic. And based on all this input, the program identifies relevant measures for the particular school. The school draws a heart shape like around the school on a map, and this signifies the zone where measures will be put into action. The school is devoted to work actively with awareness about the positive effects on health, environment, and road safety that comes from walking and cycling instead of driving. And if driving is necessary, parents are encouraged to drop the kids off before entering the Heart Zone so that the kids can walk the last part to school. The City of Oslo contributes with physical road safety measures inside the Heart Zone designed to meet the challenges that they described in the assessment phase. This program started up last year with 3 schools as pilots, and this year we are involved with 15 new schools. In 2021, we aim at 10 more schools, and so on until we reach the goal of Heart Zones around all approximately 110 or so elementary schools in our town. The central program group includes members not only from the Agency for Urban Environment, but also from the education agency and the Agency for Planning and Building Services in the city of Oslo. And this is cooperation is important because it helps us to raise awareness about road safety within the city of Oslo and our units, and strengthen our ability to consider road safety when planning new building projects. I'd like to also say something about the ongoing project of building infrastructure for cycling in Oslo. The City Council decided a plan for a network of bicycle infrastructure in 2018. In order to get more citizens to opt for bicycle as a means of transportation, the city needs to offer a coherent network for safe cycling. Bicycle riders is a type of hybrid road user, you might say, that is forced to share the road lanes with car drivers and the pavement area with the pedestrians on the terms of those other road users. And it is allowed to cycle on the pavement in Norway. But how effective transportation on bicycle is can therefore be somewhat limited. To increase transportation on foot and bicycle, it is also important to feel safe, as mentioned before today. And even though sharing the areas runs quite smoothly most of the time, luckily, it can in some situations seem like more of a competition and be a source of conflict and risk. So by separating the cyclists from the shared areas also contributes to improve conditions for pedestrians. The network of bicycle infrastructure in Oslo is carried out in collaboration with the Norwegian Public Roads Administration and is founded on a thorough assessment of destinations like schools, public transport stops, shops, and workplaces. The work is carried out stepwise, where the easiest improvements come in place first and the more complex facilities come in place more gradually. So on the map, the blue signifies completed work and the red signifies planned work. So as you can see, we've come a good way, but there is still a lot to be done. The network will consist of facilities like intersection measures, such as waiting boxes for cyclists in front of waiting cars, as shown in the picture on the right there. Furthermore, bicycle lanes on one or both sides of the road, separate bicycle paths, sometimes with separate pavements on the side, contraflow cycling, pavement crossings for cyclists, such as shown in the picture there on the left, to create a coherent network. It also consists of speed reducing measures and guiding signs for bicycle riders to find their way around. One other major task for the road safety section this autumn is to inspect a stretch of 10 kilometers of the already established network of bicycle infrastructure to see if any improvements for road safety need to be made. City of Oslo bicycles is another measure that contributes to reduce motor traffic in downtown areas. This is a public-private collaboration where citizens can register themselves as users for a fee and get access to transportation downtown without a car. So what all these examples show is that the mobility pattern in Oslo is changing gradually from less motorized form of transportation to more environment-friendly solutions. Very often, this change is compatible with road safety and public health, but sometimes it proposes new challenges. Last summer, Oslo, as most European larger cities, experienced the invasion of electric scooters, and the challenge continued this year. So micromobility is a form of transport that has caught us a bit off guard, and we need to collect more knowledge in order to find proper ways to handle it. There is work in progress in this area, and the City of Oslo will be one of several participants in a 3-year research and developing program led by the Institute of Transport Economics. And this will bring insight to possibilities for regulations and new road safety measures. So what we expect to see ahead is a continued collaboration for road safety on different levels and in different sectors, based on science and research to tackle future challenges as mobility evolve. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ida. Now, this is where you have to imagine in your head a massive round of applause. Well done. Really, it's so inspiring to hear about the progress that you've made in Oslo. Of course, the work is not done, and there are always new challenges, like you mentioned there at the end with the e-scooters. But really fantastic. Thank you very much for also explaining the school zones, the heart zones, and the work that you've been doing on the infrastructure for cyclists. So we'll be coming back to you, of course, during the panel debate, but now it's time to go closer to home, to Brussels. So I've been living in Brussels for 20 years. 20 years ago, my friends used to say, "Oh, it's a cyclist, it must be Ellen." So now, of course, we've got many more cyclists. And since last year, new Brussels Minister for Mobility, Elke van den Brandt. We're very happy to have Stefan van den Hende, who works in the cabinet of Elke van den Brandt with us today. So Stefan said that his inspiration for some of the work that he's been trying to get off the ground and he'll present here today is from Ghent, from Stockholm, from Berlin, and now we'll have Oslo as well. So we can see the presentation. Just put it into presenter mode and then unclick your mute button. And then I say over to you, Stefan. I know you've got a lot of slides. You've got a good 15 minutes for your presentation, but I'll give you a sign when we're getting towards the end so that we have time to discuss some of these questions that keep popping up from the participants. Thank you very much also for the audience to send us some really good quality questions. We'll do our best to answer those after Stefan.
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Stefan van den Hende. I am an advisor. Wait, how do I move this slide? There we go. I am an advisor to this beautiful lady who is Elke van den Brandt. She's a minister for mobility, public works and road safety in the Brussels capital region. And for us, road safety has really been and is really a priority ever since we came into power in a way, and Vision Zero has become an essential part of our view. I have to say, one of the other cities that inspired us is Oslo. When we saw the news that Oslo didn't have any road deaths amongst pedestrians and cyclists, we were like, yeah, we want to have that too. That should be our goal. If Oslo can do it, we can do it. And interestingly enough, for us, it's actually the first time in the last 20 years, I think now, that there's one minister in Brussels for the region who really combines those three aspects. Before, there was always different ministers for different aspects. So we had a minister of mobility, minister for public works, and sometimes even a third one for road safety, which didn't work. But now we have all three competences combined, which is really a big plus. And so we approved in March this year, just in time for the COVID crisis, really our SUMP. Good Move it's called, which is our vision for 2030. There was some great work done by our predecessor, Pascal Smet, we have to be honest, and we were able to then finish that work. And actually in the process of finishing the SUMP, one thing we really strengthened was the aspect of road safety, which was because the competences were split before, which wasn't as strong yet as the other parts of it. So we really went for a strengthened vision on road safety as well. Good Move is really our shared vision, our one tool now for Brussels regional mobility, and generally that entails all the municipalities. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Brussels structure, but we still have 19 municipalities here, have quite a big say still on mobility, and we've tried to really have a vision, a global vision for all of them. We managed to bring that vision together as a unified vision by really co-constructing the whole vision. It was a process of almost 2 years that started before we were empowered, that we finished, with thousands, literally thousands of participants, online, offline events, really all kinds of things. And because we've co-constructed the vision, we have a feeling, and that's also clear from the reactions we got during the public, we had like a public enquête publique, public research, that showed that there was a huge support also amongst the public for our plan. And it's really a shared vision. We started really from that shared vision of where we want to go. I won't go too much into details, but it's basically, you know, taking into account climate change, air pollution, road safety, noise pollution, all kinds of health effects, greening the city. And that's vision we put into an action plan, our SUMP, which has 6 pillars and 50 actions, which I won't go through in all. I will just show 2 images, which I think summarize it very well. One is this. Basically, at the moment, all transport modes can go pretty much everywhere in the city. And there's not really a structure to where they can go, and it causes a lot of problems because we have a lot of traffic that goes into the neighborhoods. We have a lot of problems with speeding in neighborhoods, etc., etc. So the Good Move vision is really the idea that we've divided Brussels, and this you can see in the next slide, in neighborhoods. So the colors here are the municipalities, and the blue lines show neighborhoods. And the idea is basically that for each neighborhood, and there's about 50 of them, that we put in place specific circulation plans, which are a bit in between what Barcelona did with their super blocks and what Ghent did with their circulation plan, that we really basically push out transit traffic from those neighborhoods, that we bring down speeds that we will already do sooner, and that we've really worked on a specialization of the roads. So which users are most apt to use which roads, and which numbers of traffic do we want to have on which roads. So to really keep the neighborhoods free from all transit traffic. And one of the key measures in our plan is what we call City 30, because it's not a zone 30, it's really the city. The default in Brussels from 1st of January next year will become 30 miles an hour. We've done this for multiple reasons. Some have been already mentioned before. You know, there's the fact that that we have less accidents because the speed goes down, that accidents are less bad, that it's good for all kinds of other stuff like noise pollution, like air pollution as well. And basically, we're going full speed ahead with this at the moment. We've identified basically an implementation plan that's going full speed ahead at the moment, identifying which roads stay on a slightly higher speed, where we have modified regulations. This is the interesting thing about Brussels structure. We're a region within the Belgian federal system, so we have quite a lot of things to say. We have quite a lot of competences ourselves on road regulations. We're working on adapting infrastructure, which will be an ongoing effort for the next 10 years, to be honest. But we're not waiting for all the infrastructure to be perfectly adapted to a slower speed, to just implement the slower speed and enforce it. And then we're working on enforcement, sanctions and stuff. And so the results will look like this, basically. What we have now is we have quite a lot of zones, 30 already, about 53%, I think, of Brussels is already zone 30, but it's very illegible. It's very difficult to know in which zone you are. And so what we've done is also work of simplifying this. Only the main arteries where we want to then also put in place, for example, separate bike lanes, and have been putting in place second bike lanes, those can stay at a slightly higher speed. There's some areas like the left bottom bit that you see in 70, that's because it's the ring road around Brussels that stays on 70, or well, actually even 90 in this case. But generally the speeds will be done down, and the whole idea will become that it's also much more easy to read as a road user of what speed you have to use in which area. And then as part of Good Move, we're also working on action plans focused on different aspects of Good Move that kind of elaborate what we have in our sump. We were supposed to really work on a road safety action plan by the end of this year, pretty much, but COVID has really delayed the process, but because we also want to make it a co-construction process. And so we've delayed that for a year. It's now starting again via online webinars, but there we're also really working on all different aspects of road safety to even more clearly define what we have to do to reach that vision zero, you know, when it comes to changing behavior, adapting infrastructure. And this is something that comes back in everything we do. Yes, we work on big plans and we want to have a good sump and we want to have a good road safety action plan, but we're not waiting to have the plan in place before implementing already the measures that we can. So for example, we have a very clear list of black points for road safety where there's a lot of accidents, and we're already implementing measures to really improve those or to change those. And when it comes to COVID, I think we can be quite proud here in Brussels of what we've done as part of our COVID response. What we saw during lockdown, and I think we had quite a severe lockdown here in Belgium, is that some really key figures. I won't go through them all, but car traffic went down a lot. Public transport really collapsed. Biking first went down and went up. We saw very quickly in Brussels where the space for cars is very dominant. It became very clear how much space is actually attributed to them, and then it had a very severe impact on the air pollution. Many people during the lockdown were like, wow, I can finally breathe, it's so quiet in this city, and I can finally hear the people in the streets rather than the cars everywhere. And so that, coupled with also road safety numbers that we saw really improved during the lockdown because there was just less traffic, even though there was more cycling. A survey that showed that a lot of people were afraid of public transport and are still wanted to switch to cycling, but that there was also a risk that people who are in cars switched to people that were in cars or that were in public transport, switched to cars. There was really a risk. So we figured, okay, we need to go full speed ahead. And so basically we took our sump and we looked, okay, what are measures we can implement quickly in a basic version to really go ahead as fast as possible. And so I will focus on two aspects of our sump. One is the good neighborhood part. So normally we were working on this and we have a goal of starting to work on 5 neighborhoods every year, and that's ongoing. This year it's even 6 because we were working on the Brussels city center, and then 5 more neighborhoods, and we've selected already the ones to start in 2021. So that was normal, but then during the lockdown we saw, okay, there's a problem because a lot of public space in Belgium is too car dominant and there's no space to have social distancing. Sidewalks are too small and stuff like that. So we've really, in a quick way, tried to enhance the space for pedestrians, and we've implemented residential zones, slow streets we call them, in a quick way, some of them as a permanent measure, some of them as a temporary measure, or some of them as a measure that we're now involving. For example, all of the city center became a slow street, and now we're using what we learned from that to implement our calmer neighborhoods as part of the Good Move plan. We've also done a lot of tactical urbanism. So for example, when we saw a lot of people's holidays and summer plans were cancelled, we basically launched a call to all kinds of associations that collect neighborhoods, people that work on mobility, that don't work on mobility. And we said, look, we want to give you a budget. We'll give you an okay to take up a street or take a whole neighborhood and do something cool with it. So we had all kinds of cool stuff, like a massive sandbox in the street. We had people just sharing their street completely. It was a massive success that also showed the possibility of what we can do if we just change the uses of space in Brussels. And then I think the thing that has had the most impact is what we did with the good network part of Good Move. So already during the lockdown, we've continued working on speed enforcement. We have been generally attaching all our crossroad lights. We've been hooking them up to one central thing, and so we were able to quickly adapt also crossroads to give more time to pedestrians and cyclists. And we're reevaluating now, okay, what have we learned from that, and how do we now continue giving more time basically and more comfort to the flows of cyclists and pedestrians. And then basically what we did, and that has really had the most impact, is we basically took the map, and we have this network map of cycle lanes that we have a vision for 2030. We took that map and we said, okay, which of these measures can we implement very quickly? And we focused on the Bike Plus network, which is our high quality main cycling itineraries that we want to put in place. And basically coupled to a call to people like, if you can avoid public transport, switch to bikes. We put in place basically about 40 kilometers of extra bike lanes. Very simple often. We made them, we just took one lane for cars where there was, for example, 2 or 3. We took one lane for cars and we made it into a cycling path very quickly. With concrete blocks or other measures to protect where we can, and where not, we just gave enough space that there's really a lot of weight space. And so in that way, we created very quickly space and as safe space as we could for cyclists in a very quick way. And if you put the 2 maps together of where we put in place on the top left here, which lanes we adapted, and then the network of the Velo Plus, if you put in place together, we really used our stump as a basis to really quickly implement cycling lanes. And they're not perfect. We now have a huge challenge because they're being used a lot and they're so very popular that the challenge is now to make them into a permanent separated structure, because there's always on major arteries. So the next years will be a huge challenge to really implement complete restructuration works that basically make most of these cycle lanes permanent. And they're not, we want to keep as many as possible, but they're not gained yet. We are actually today, we're going to court because an association of car defenders wants to cancel our cycling lanes and attack us in court. So it's not like it was without any kind of opposition. I could talk a bit more about good service, but I will skip that part. Just so you know, we've also put in place extra park and rides on the edge of the city. We had some already, and we basically were able to open up 2 big parking lots just on the edge of the city, temporarily make them free as well for people who are coming in, link them up with bicycle terminals, and give people extra options if they come with a car to Brussels to leave their car outside and come by bike into the city. The results have been quite great, I have to say, and we're quite proud of it. Generally, I mean, also because the lockdown is still partially in place, traffic hours, but traffic is still on a lower level, we see. Peak hours have really flattened. There's less traffic jams at the moment still. We hope that continues, but let's see how it evolves. Public transport is back to full capacity at the moment, though the usage is still down. But what we've seen is really a huge increase in biking. 78% plus if we compare September 2019, September 2020, while on average between from year to year, the increase is 13%. Last year was 9%. We've just had a huge jump now, which we're very happy about, because that's also good, was one of the goals of our Good Move. So if it comes to lessons learned, I'd say if you want to go somewhere, it's a really good idea to co-construct your vision and your plans with all different kinds of stakeholders to get everyone aboard. I'd say once you have your vision, don't hesitate to move quickly, use tactical urbanism and quick wins. You can wait for the perfect design cycling lane, and to have the perfect design and have all the necessary permits you need, and really, for the perfect project, but that takes time, then that takes, a lot of effort. And if you wait for that, it's very difficult, I think, to reach your goals. So don't wait for that. Implement quick wins. Look for places where you can quickly diminish car pressure if that's a problem, like it was with us. And it helps to tactical urbanism. I think has helped us a lot to show people the added benefit of putting in place, for example, a cycling lane, because it's very hard to argue that there's cycling infrastructure needed when there's no cyclists yet, because there's no infrastructure. And so to quickly show that, hey, if you put in place structure, cyclists will come, quick wins can help, and that helps people to join in your thing. Voilà. That's it. Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much, Stefan. Really, congratulations as well to you, to the team of Elke, and all the efforts that you've been making here first in Brussels. So also please now imagine the big applause from 250 people we have participating at the moment. And I hope those of you who are listening are now on the edge of your seats, because it's question time. We've got 20-25 minutes or so. Thank you again for sending all of your questions. If I may start with Ida. So because people were really interested to find out a little bit more in detail about what you're doing there in Oslo. So two very specific questions for you. One is, how large are the heart zones of the school? Are we talking about 500 meters, 3 kilometers? And yeah, and then the second question is, do you have any idea of the cost of the measures that you put in place over the years, and more importantly, the return, i.e. the savings in public health? So coming back to that important point about investing in road safety, and then you will see the returns. Have you been able to crunch any numbers on that?
Yes, well, yeah, to answer the first, most easy question, the heart zone stretches for about 500 meters around the school. Okay. And it's not an even shape, and yes. You have to look at the specific school in order to identify where it will be effective to draw the heart line. But about 500 meters around the school in all areas, with the school in the center. The second question is, over the years, I'm quite new in the city of Oslo myself, to investigate the numbers over the years, I should have to do a bit more research and come back to you. But of course, we do invest, thinking that it gives something back in the form of saving life and prohibited injuries. Yes, and also to the bigger aspect in this, which is public health. And it's not easily measured in numbers all the time. But we'll try to do some research and come back to you on the specific numbers.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah. So Stefan, you catch your breath. I'm coming to you in a moment. A question from Matthew. So you were talking about, Matthew, you there? You were talking about walking and cycling, and how it is, the person who's asking the question, Jeremy, is saying it is indeed a love relationship. We're talking about heart zones around schools. Now we're talking about a love relationship between pedestrians and cyclists. Not always, but we'll come to that as well. But specifically, this question is from people with physical disabilities, such as the deaf or the blind. They are often mentioning the no noise from the cyclists. Now we've got also electric cars, of course, coming. What would be the best way to tackle this this issue? Anything that the EU can do, or the EU can recommend to others?
Well, I think it's a great point, and I also want to pick up, I think a similar point was made by J.A.L. de Costa, and if I could, Ellen, quickly also pick up points made by Asendorf, Rachel, Zemal, and Rosa, all making similar kinds of issues around cycling in mixed traffic. And my first point is, this is why it's such a fascinating and complex and difficult issue. And I think the active road user would really be, active mobility guy would be really shocked to hear that their mobility sometimes can be very make disabled people, particularly the visually impaired community, really quite feel quite vulnerable. For example, the bike lane that goes behind the bus stop is a great idea in terms of making the cyclist safe, but if you're a disabled person coming off the bus, it can be very threatening. the absence of a curb in these shared mixed traffic areas. If you're visually disabled, you're using the curb as a place to know where you're safe and where you're not safe. So I think all of the message, I don't have any magic answers, but it's about making sure that our processes, including sustainable urban mobility planning, are inclusive and accessible. And we could all do well, those of us, you and me, Ellen, we're cyclists, is to remember the stop principles, that, you know, you should defer. If you're faster and heavier, you should defer to the slower and the more vulnerable. Just quickly, I mean, some of the points made about mixed traffic, I think Asendorf said that, you know, we don't do segregation, we do mixed traffic. And Stefan was very eloquent on this about the Wunnerfen, the use of these mixed zones. And this addresses an issue, I think, raised by Rachel, that sometimes the speed limit, I mean, this is going to sound very heretical for people who hate 30, but sometimes it should be lower. It should be around 20 kilometers per hour to enable people to be safe. And so this comes to the issue when we're talking about 30-kilometer zones, the key word is default. And that's what Stefan and Elke van der Brandt are introducing in Brussels. And put it simply, if you can't see a sign, it's 30. And then it could be higher if you've got genuinely segregated roads and you saw the orange roads on Stefan's map there, and it might be lower in other places. And finally, then to come to Rosa's point, how do you enforce a 30K zone, which I'm sorry, I'm linking lots of different things together here. I think it's about clarity. So in other words, I mean, I'll say slightly critically to Stefan, I don't think a lot of people really understood in the middle of Brussels that it was 20 kilometers per hour, or certainly they didn't follow it. It needs to be transparent and understood and discussed. It needs to be enforced, which is all about the partnerships with local police that we saw. And you also need national European recognition of the importance of these things. And the last thing is much more touchy-feely political. If you go community by community and address these things and say, we're doing this in your neighborhood to make you and your children feel safer, it's a lot easier to accept than if it comes at the top down, dare I say, European or national thing saying, now listen up, little people, you're going to drive slower. That is the recipe for disaster. It's got to be about people doing this to make their neighborhoods safer, nicer, greener, fairer, blah, 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 blah. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Matthew. Now, you've managed to also reply to 2 or 3 other of the questioners. I appreciate that as well. First to Stefan, and then I want to come back to Ida with the same question. So Ida, please think about it. ETSC in July, we published a report looking at the impact of the lockdown on road safety. Now, of course, COVID continues. The challenges that it throws up in relation to mobility continues. Question from Herbert Engelmoor is to Stefan, what do you think about the increase of car use in cities during and after, well, let's see when the after is, COVID? And I want to also ask about, specifically in Brussels, we've seen this polarization now, of course, well, not of course, unfortunately also amplified by the media between cyclists and drivers. And I also want Ida to think about this. What is the best way of tackling that friction between the various road users? You mentioned, Stefan, also the court case now that is has been launched. So 2 questions. What about the increase of car use now? And then specifically, what do we do to tackle friction between cyclists and car drivers? We talked a little bit about possible frictions between cyclists and pedestrians. So first, Stefan, please, and then back to Oslo.
Yeah, on the car use in Brussels, actually the numbers at the moment show we still have less car use now than before the lockdown. So at the moment, what we see is that on the main roads, the levels are going up, that they're almost at the same level like before, but not yet. We're at 90 to 100% generally. And what we see though is that in the neighborhood roads, the smaller roads, their traffic is still a bit more down. So at the moment we don't have that problem yet. though we see that it has been slowly going up, and it hasn't stabilized yet. So there is still, especially because public transport, like I said, is still under pressure. I mean, they're at 65% to 70% of usage, while normally the modal split in Brussels was very much two groups, cars and public transport, and cycling has always been the smaller sister or brother. So we're still trying to push that idea. That's why we are still putting, even though we now have the court case, don't tell them, but we're still putting in place. Last week we still implemented a new cycling path. There's 2 more projects coming probably if everything goes all right. And on that amplified friction, I think for me it's a matter of political leadership in a way. There's always what we see, and there has been for a very long time. I think they're a minority, honestly, of very loud pro-car lobbyists. Or they're not necessarily professional lobbyists, but just generally groups who are very dedicated to their car use. And I think you shouldn't let your policy be determined by the ones who shout the loudest, who will go to courts for something like that. What we see is that the numbers show that a lot of people were willing to move to bikes, that the returns from people are really positive in a way that many people have literally come up to us. You know, I used to use my car all the time. I've switched to cycling. Now you've put in place, you know, a safe itinerary for me. And I think there's different groups also within those people who oppose your measures. I think for us in Brussels, we see there's a fringe of almost extremists, and we actually try not to amplify them. The people who are now going to court against us, it's a Facebook group also that's known already by now, that have threatened people with violence, and we basically, as long as they don't distance themselves from those threats, we won't go into a debate with them, and we will rather have the debate with people who oppose us, but who respect at least the political discourse and who respect people's integrity. So I think it's a mix of not amplifying those voices more than it is. And I think, yes, here and unfortunately the media has I think, yeah, you can always I don't want to criticize the media too much, but I feel like they've given a voice to people who have literally been threatening not just us and not just our minister even, because I think she can almost take it, but also who have threatened other activists, and that's really problematic. And we have been saying something like we won't go into dialogue. I want to pick up on one more point. It's the mixed versus separate.
Last one, please.
The mixed versus separate discussion. I think it's a mix, as in it depends on the road, on the number of cars you have. What we see in Brussels is that we can't have separate bike lanes everywhere because we just don't have the space. Even if we get rid of all parking space and we just have the lanes, there's many streets where there's just not space enough. And so what we've done is we're now working on new guidelines on what, based on traffic numbers, space, and the type of road that we have, on where and the speed, sorry, that's the fourth factor, and on some other factors, on where it should be mixed or separate cycling and cars. And that guide will be coming out with it soon, and we'll also have a dialogue with the people in the associations and stakeholders about that as well soon. It's based on what Cerema and Krauw have done in France and the Netherlands.
And the Netherlands, fantastic, great, thank you very much. To Ida in Oslo, because I remember it's Ida, you're going to take the question? Yeah, just unmute, thanks. Because I remember this was also one of the points that came up in your presentation. So the high public interest, but also sometimes the conflict and possible friction. So if you could just tell us how do you manage that in Oslo? What's your advice? And we've heard really honest account from Stefan. I mean, I think we're still in the middle of it here in Brussels. Ida.
Yeah, I recognize a lot what Stefan is talking about, obviously, and there is a tendency in the media to maybe exaggerate the conflict between drivers and cyclists a bit, because a good media case, of course, is always about conflict. And I would like to emphasize that my impression and the knowledge that we have is that most of these situations and meetings in traffic between drivers and cyclists actually go quite well, and they cooperate quite well, which is important to traffic. But of course, yeah, and I do think that the extremists are a quite marginal group, but of course they do exist, and sometimes it does create risk and difficult situations in Oslo as well. And of course, by bettering the infrastructure, it becomes more clear where you are supposed to be as a cyclist. And as a cyclist, you really are a hybrid user of all traffic space. So I think there is a big job to be done by making the cyclists more aware of the role that they have. And we've had a national campaign in Norway, not especially for Oslo, but of course it has had its effects in Oslo as well. And the campaign spoke both to drivers and to cyclists, trying to use humor and create understanding for each other's roles as participants in the bigger picture, and to create road safety for all. So I think that has had an effect. And yeah, to raise awareness and respect for each other's roles, I think, and to realize that will also help me and my mobility and my needs in traffic. I think we still have a way to go in this. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Jenny, I wanted to ask you to respond to, there were a couple of questions about e-scooters. So where are we with e-scooters in, sorry, I didn't mean e-scooters, e-bikes. Do we cover e-bikes in our ETSC report? And on the issue of vehicle, what are our hopes and expectations in relation to reducing speed now with the new technology coming, intelligent speed assistance?
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of e-bikes, obviously they are gaining in popularity, and we can see that particularly, I think, in the Netherlands and Germany. And I think they are appearing more in the sort of data, particularly around collisions, and I think particularly among the elderly population. So it's definitely something to consider and that we need to look at carefully. Obviously, also they go a lot faster than most normal bicycles, so we need to see how they are. Need to see the space that they are sharing on our roads in particular. In terms of ISA, the sort of intelligent speed, we know that this is important, and I think our key message here is for cities to prepare for ISA, and for ISA to be effective we need clear signs in cities, but we also need appropriate speeds set for the roads so that they are credible, and that the technology can really work to the best of its ability. I think that would be our key message for cities and ISA.
Great, thank you very much. Matthew, if I could come back to you with the question that we had from Torsten on e-scooters and yeah, talking of conflict, so their interaction with pedestrians. I've certainly been surprised by e-scooters whizzing past me on the pavement. So how is the EU dealing with this topic?
Well, it's a very interesting topic. I think a lot of people are looking at it. We're trying to gather data from across Europe, both from member states and cities. So I'd like to signal now, more information, please. We're interested in the safety of the scooter itself. I mean, there are some question marks in terms of design, the smallness of the wheels, center of balance of the rider. I tried one once, and I didn't feel very competent at all. It's also part of the issue of segregating this group of users from other motorized traffic. Again, they are vulnerable because of their relationship with motorized traffic, let's be clear, in terms of deaths and serious injuries. There's some interesting ideas going on about geofencing, which I think we should look at. So normally these e-scooters are tootling along at 25 kilometers per hour, that's maximum speed. There's nothing to stop them being geofenced, so they have to slow to walking speed, for example, in a pedestrianized zone. And that's interesting. And I think we should look at it. But the other point, when people talk about the safety of e-scooters themselves, I don't want to be, controversial again, but their risk is in relation to the car driver. Again, to pick up the point in your report, Alan, 99% of pedestrian deaths are with motorized vehicles. So we need to put e-scooters within the group of vulnerable road users, find sensible ways to mitigate conflict between different groups of vulnerable road users, but keep our eye on the big picture.
Thank you very much. So I'd love to keep talking to folk for, well into lunch, but we've only got 5 minutes left. I'd like to finish by asking you one last round of questions. So Jenny, if you could put up the slides. We've got 4 images here related to 4 of the points brought up in ETSC's PIN report. And I'd like to ask each one of you to think how you would address the particular group or situation. And I'll come to each one of you, so you'll each have one. I start with Jenny and that lone lady cyclist looking out into the dark night. What can we improve there? So thinking of European level or city level. Jenny, I don't hear you.
Sorry, something
seems
to have happened to my slide. Sorry. Yeah, I think the key really there is something that I mentioned in my report, which is that 28% of the collisions that occurred for cyclists happened at intersections, and here we have one here, also in the dark. Which adds obviously another level. So I think the thing with intersections is that they need to be clear for all road users. Everybody needs to have a clear line of sight of everybody that is on the road at that time. I think that's the key message there around intersections.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Jenny. And next over to you, Matthew. We've not mentioned vans in the discussion so far, but it is in our report. And I would say that this would fall into the EU competence. They now have to be fitted with tachographs, well, a certain section of them. What else could we do to manage vans and their speeding in cities where we have large numbers of pedestrians and cyclists?
Yes, thank you very much, Ellen. You brought me out into a cold sweat. I thought it was one of those things when I have to prove I wasn't a robot again and I was going to have to click on all images. Have you noticed, by the way, how all these proving you're not a robot involves mobility? That's interesting. Anyway, look, it's a great question. And I saw in the chat a very good question from Barry Lyons about driving in cities from the perspective of HGV drivers. And I'd like to pick up that too. Sometimes we need to think a bit more broadly about these issues. You're right. You mentioned the tachograph. And Barry makes the point that driving in cities is really stressful if you're an HGV driver. And the statistics, and you've done a report on this, Ellen, about HGV safety, suggest that, in a way, you're right to feel stressed because it is dangerous for vulnerable road users, the interrelationship with the trucks. Not your fault, but there are ways in which we can improve things. For example, the new general safety regulation prescribes vision standards for trucks. So the size of the window, the visibility you have when you're turning right or left in the UK. The Germans and some of the other countries are going further and doing these turning assistance schemes to really encourage the early take-up of this type of technology, the warning of the HGV driver that you've got a vulnerable road user right in your vicinity. And Vienna's taken it as far as actually banning right turns, so that you have to kind of go around the block in order to come to where you want to. And the other thing is, I think when we look at vans, and this van having a, you know, tootling along a substantial speed there, let's think creatively about how we can make life easier for people delivering goods into cities and for the city and the other users. It was a great project I wanted to flag called the Docomo project in Berlin, which means bringing things as far as possible in the nighttime. And in this case, they're bringing them to a parcels depot, and then you have a whole system of cargo bikes picking up the goods and distributing parcels within a particular radius. Just one example of how we can, again, bring our carbon emissions under control, make life a bit safer and more manageable, and frankly, make the life of van and HGV drivers a bit less stressful too. So let's think creatively about addressing these things.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Matthew. So to Ida and Oslo, we've heard a lot about your work on children in schools and the pilot that is now slowly being extended. I want to ask specifically about how you design your spaces, because I heard that you're also designing the space from the perspective of a small child.
Well, I discussed it a bit with my colleague Maya here, and we sort of base it on the assumption that a good city is a city that is good for kids is a city that is good for everyone. And a big issue, of course, for kids and pedestrians as a whole group is that risk very often occurs when they're about to cross the roads. So making it safe for a kid to cross the road, trying to imagine that you're like 1.20 meters high and need to be visible for a car. Obviously, we need to work with things like sight lines and also build where it's necessary, for example, around school areas, bump outs in the street. And also this contributes to visibility and reducing speed. So those are some factors that make it safer for the smaller and even more vulnerable road users as well. Mm.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much with that. And then, so I know we've gone over time. We've just got one more minute, please, if you'll be patient. Stefan, so one of the pieces of research cited in our report from Ireland shows that older people walk more slowly and can't walk as far as others. How are you taking this particular group into account in your Brussels work on road safety?
I think it's a lot in the design of the streets. I think the picture is actually very telling because it has what we call in Brussels a begging button. So as a pedestrian, you have to beg to be able to cross, and you have to descend to the place of the cars. And I think a redesign here would be the perfect solution. You bring the cars up. So the cars have a speed bump that they have to go up that makes them slow down, and the pedestrians can just go along smoothly and maybe add some markings. And so that indicates redesign the space to give priority to the pedestrian here rather than to the car traffic. And then generally in Brussels, we work a lot on accessibility. We have a big accessibility plan that really road by road, infrastructure by infrastructure, because also on public transport, it's an issue in Brussels, to methodologically really make every space accessible to all road users, including older people. Because if you design the streets and to fit for children, older people, you basically design it almost universally.
Mm-hmm. Super. Great, thank you very much. So now coming to the closing, all of the presentations from the event will be on our website in the next couple of days, including also a link to the recording. We would again encourage you to look at the report and specifically the recommendations for cities, for the national level, the strategic planning, as was mentioned by quite a few of the panelists, and to the EU, so Matthew's to-do list. So finally, COVID has brought some dramatic changes to our lives, to the way we live and the way we move. The pandemic has accelerated moves towards safer speeds and safer infrastructure in many towns and cities, and budgets to support this from the national level, but also now, of course, we're looking at the funds coming from the new EU budget. And we would absolutely applaud these initiatives, not just the money coming to keep the work going. But we must recognize that one-off measures will not be enough. And well, both Ida and Stefan explained how it's really a lot of hard work. We've heard today that we need a transformation to a safe system, and that is more than just putting up a pop-up bike lane. The Commission, in its pandemic exit strategy for mobility, said that it supports these new urban mobility solutions for active, collective and shared mobility in a safe manner. So we think from the side of ETSC that these are the right words, but now it's time for action. With that, one last, virtual round of applause, and thank you to the panelists. You've been great, and the colleagues here at ETSC. The technology worked as well. Wishing you all the very best, and lots of inspiration for your work on improving road safety. Thank you. Bye-bye.